Hey, buen dia. Welcome back to Single Black Man from Des Moines. My name is Al Simon Jr. A little about me. I used to be a dog handler in the service. I worked in healthcare, retail, and libraries. I've taught Hapkido for over 20 years. And right now I'm a fledgling writer looking for my tribe. I am currently single and retired from marriage. I post all my stories on Instagram and on YouTube. If you'd like to purchase my works, please go to al_simon@hotmail.com and I'll send you a complete list of all my stories and prices. I go through PayPal. If you need more flexibility with payment options, then go over to Smashwords. I post stuff every week. Both fiction and nonfiction. Today I'm going to try to do two pieces, both fiction and nonfiction. The first one is called A Monster is Born. This is a nonfiction piece. A monster is born. In the house I grew up in, there were two wooden ionic columns separating the dining room from the living room. Each column was buttressed to the adjacent wall with enough room to hold a plant or tchotchkes or a rambunctious 4-year-old boy. I fell one day about 3 feet to the floor and landed on my face. I busted my lower lip. Nothing life-threatening, however, serious enough for Mom and Dad to rush me to Broadlawns, the county hospital. I don't recall saying anything until the doctor in the typical long white coat and stethoscope dangling around his neck came in. As he assessed me in the best imitation of Bugs Bunny, I asked, "What's up, Doc?" It broke the room up. Everyone laughed. It was the first time I heard an audience laugh at something I said. I liked the feeling. I was hooked. So much so, like Joe Biden repeating his Giuliani 9/11 line, I kept saying, "What's up, Doc? What's up, Doc?" Till finally, as the doctor was stitching up my lip, he said, "This'll shut him up." Well, for the moment. Throughout my life, I had often looked for opportunities to make people laugh, often with disastrous results. A lot of trial and error until late in high school, until I found my voice and what worked for me. Prior to then, there would be times in class where I'd say things that would bomb completely. Once in an assembly in junior high, I tried to get a laugh out of the audience at an orientation. I was thinking about attending my school, and I look up and I catch the derisive look from one of my favorite teachers. Once I was part of a mentor program. I was in my 30s then. Often I'd be asked to do some public speaking on behalf of the program. One addressed to some educators, I'd tell a joke during my speech that again bombed completely. So much so that the people that asked me to speak shifted uncomfortably in their seats and never asked me to speak again. I wasn't getting paid, so it wasn't a big deal. Not that it stopped me. I didn't find my voice until my junior year in high school. That's when people began to say that I was funny. I admit I stole a lot of my material. One example, I was in junior achievement and waiting outside with a classmate. Someone had asked her how she was doing, and she responded, "Without." I may or may not have snorted a laugh, but I kept that line and savored it. Whenever anyone asked me how I was doing, I'd say, "Without." Granted, there was a lot of justification for that. I was raised by a single mom at the poverty level most of my life. I didn't have a car, nor did my mom. Then and now, I was prone to being impecunious. Being poor didn't leave me with many options. However, even though I wouldn't state the prime reason for being without, everyone who heard it would assume I meant sex. Most that knew me would blow it off. I did get some blowback. I arrived at a family function and an acquaintance of my mother asked me that question, and upon giving my answer, my mom rebuked me with a, "Hey!" Another time, most notably, I was in the cafeteria at Iowa Methodist. This chick named Sandy was at the checkout counter and heard me say "without" to someone. I could tell she was angry as she lit into me. "What are you doing without?" As I ran down the list, she'd ignored them and blurted out, "It's sex, 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 sex. I don't want you to say that around me anymore." Don't get me wrong, I was furious. Sure enough, next time she sees me, she asks, "How you doing now?" There was an underlining tone to her question. It was clear that she was trying to bait me. So I answered, "Fine." It turns out that I regret capitulating to her. She flaunted her dominance over me every chance she got. She told her coworkers how she made me do what she wanted. As I grew older, this would fester. Of course, as time went on, I developed arguments I could have said freedom of speech. Ask me in another way. In other words, what do you know? How's your day going? Or even, how are you? Dave Chappelle once said that he didn't know where the line was until he crossed it. I admit I no longer say without anymore. That time is past. It served its purpose, but I still hate Sandy. What cemented this was a guy named Dave from HR. He was used to my saying without and would ask me another question, to which I had another prepared quip. I liked and still like Dave. I could see him being someone I'd want in my HR department. He looked at me and with an appraising eye said, "You got a line for everything, don't you?" That affected me profoundly. I began to reassess how I was coming across. I was a black man in Iowa. More than once, I've been in situations where I was the only black or person of color in the room. I guess being the funny persona was to put people at ease. And what I perceived in Dave's eyes was I was coming off as a buffoon. Ding, 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 ding. That was all I needed. Now, it's not that I've abandoned my sense of humor or trying to be funny. I still try to put people at ease, but I don't go out of my way to be entertaining. I guess that's growth. Anyway, stop me if you've heard this. And that's the end of that story. And again, this was called A Monster is Born. The last one I'm going to do is titled Mom, Dad, in Mississippi. And this is pretty much chapter 1 of my novel, The People Downstairs Are Killers. And let me pull that up for you. Hang on just a second. Well, I'll be darned. Mom, Dad in Mississippi. Oh, here we are. Mom, Dad in Mississippi. Darren Wallace was 5 when he heard his mother say, "I'm going to kill that son of a bitch." She had a butcher's knife in her right hand and a burning cigarette in her left. It was a bright, sunny, and hot July day in Des Moines, Iowa. They had turned off from Mary Avenue and were now heading north on 11th Street at a torrid pace. "Who, Ma?" asked Savannah, the oldest, and Sarah, the youngest, in unison, both nearly running to keep up with Vanessa Wallace, their mother and potential murderer. "You're good for nothing, Father," Vanessa spat out. "Oh," they all affirmed as if they had never heard these threats before. Darren held up the rear, oblivious to his mother's anger, lost in a child's reverie. He had a long stick and was thwacking telephone poles as he walked by them. "He's over that wench's house." "Who, Ma?" "Mississippi." They never heard the actual name of their father's, Ellis Wallace's, paramour. Darren knew that in the past year there had been a lot of arguments between his parents. So much so, all the vitriol was a regular thing, and he'd let it roll off his back. He became inured to the harsh words being hurled about and just took it as another day. They stopped at a small 2-story house on 11th. Vanessa went up on the porch and peered at some names on the mailboxes. She began to pound her fist on one of the doors. "Open up, goddammit! I know your black ass is in there." Holding the butcher knife by the handle, she pounded on the door while occasionally taking drags from the cigarette in her left hand. When she wasn't pounding on the door, she'd go into the yard, looked up toward the second floor, knelt down, picked up some pebbles, and would hurl them up to the second floor window. Ellis Wallace, I got all your kids out here that you ain't taking care of, you no good son of a bitch. Vanessa was 35 in 1960. She was born and raised in Des Moines. She was a bright girl, and planned on a career doing secretarial work. Unfortunately, she couldn't find any jobs that would hire coloreds at that time, she would say. To offset expenses, she did domestic work. She had 3 families she worked for. She mainly cleaned, but she was also an excellent cook of soul food. Occasionally, one of her families would have her cater or cook a la carte for them. Ellis Wallace was 10 years older. He was a good provider, although he didn't have a high school education. He had dropped out of school in Longview, Texas, to help and never returned back to school. Despite any kind of education pedigree, he always ended up in some kind of supervisor position, be it in the military or the real world. He was a striking man, 6'2", physically fit, pencil-thin mustache that was reminiscent of Errol Flynn, and was always impeccably dressed. He walked with a swagger most men wish they had. Vanessa would never be forthcoming about her relationship with Ellis. In all her years, Darren never heard Vanessa say anything positive about his father. During one tirade, Darren, who was in his rebellious puberty stage, challenged her with, "If Dad was so bad, why did you marry him?" Her curt reply was, "You get tired of a man asking you all the damn time." As Darren got older, he wished he had a better relationship with his father. Being raised by a single mother, Darren was a bit socially awkward. He wished he had some skills to attract women into a harem as his father did. Vanessa once told him, "Be careful who you go out with. When you get into high school, it might be one of your sisters." Darren knew that Ellis was a smooth talker. One could make an argument that he never had time for his kids. However, he did marry Vanessa. Moreover, she was the first woman he married despite having children with other women. Darren would have an acrimonious relationship with his mother, and thus would wonder why Ellis would sign up for that. Darren was never spanked or disciplined by Ellis, and mentioned this to Vanessa. "No, he left that to me," she said. After a pensive moment, she added, "Often he'd leave the room when I was beating y'all." There were 2 times that he's seen his father angry, once with Savannah and most notably with Vanessa. Vanessa had to flee the house to get away from him. She broke into a neighbor's home and called the police. She was wearing a cloth robe over a slip and was barefoot. It wasn't long before Darren was in the alley behind their house, watching a police car slowly course down the alley with his father in the back seat, madly gesticulating. It was the only time in his life that Darren had ever cried for his father. By the time the patrol car reached the end of the alley, Ellis emerged from the back door. Darren would later relate to this story with some pride. This was the early 1960s. You know, back then he was the type of brother cops would make an example of. Dad had to be talking much shit to be let out without an ass beating. That July day in 1960 did not see the demise of Ellis Wallace. Though Ellis did not acknowledge her, it had to be embarrassing having Vanessa scream and make a scene outside the apartment. After 3 cigarettes, an indeterminate amount of profanity, and several handfuls of pebbles being tossed, Vanessa gave in and took her brood of children back to their home on 10th Street. Despite Vanessa's threats and vitriol, Ellis not only lived another day, but he had another child with Vanessa, Carlos, his son, before the 2 finally divorced and before Darren was out of grade school. And that's the end of Mom, Dad, in Mississippi. Again, please like, share, and subscribe. If you'd like to purchase my works, email me at al_simon@hotmail.com, and I'll send you a complete list of all my stories and prices. I go through PayPal. If you need more flexibility in payment options, then go to Smashwords. If you don't want to buy any of my stories but would like to support my work, then buy me a cup of coffee at buymeacupofcoffee.com/Al Simon, all one word, 4722. All right, let's get Al out of the ghetto, and let me end with this. You load 15 tons, what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't you call me 'cause I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store.